Biden allowed millions to come into the U.S. illegally. Worst president of all time, Joe Biden. So he allowed people to cut in front of other people that were trying to do it legally. Then the Biden White House, called TPS, temporary protective status, allowed those people to cut in front of the illegals that were cutting in front of everybody else. Does that make sense? So remember the 2 a.m. air flights that were landing in Jacksonville, Orlando International Airport, and Miami. So we did a story at FloridaDaily.com from the numbers that we were able to document. It was like 300,000 that flew into the state of Florida that Biden White House paid for everything and allowed to go wherever. The problem is we have no clue where they went. The newly elected Miami mayor she's a left-wing Democrat, made a comment that, well, she wasn't in favor of ICE, Immigration Customs and Enforcement on the local level, contracting or partnering up with local law enforcement officials to go after illegal immigrants. And she goes, and we've got like 200,000 that are here that came in, which kind of tells you a couple 100,000 that came in from the flights just stayed in the state of Florida. So we've got Maria Salazar. She's kind of hot, by the way. I think she's way older than us, but she's attractive. So Maria Salazar is in the South Florida Congressional District. I guess Democrats still think it's up in play. By the way, is the redistricting making it more in play, Matt?
Well, right. So her old district was more centered around Little Havana. Now it's still part of that, but not as. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize. So Maria Salazar, Republican, and she's not the only one. I think there's a few others, are in favor of keeping around the Biden policy that allowed, I understand Haitians, but there's like a dozen other countries we reported here, and to allow them to remain here illegally.
Salazar has a policy she's been pushing for the past few years called the Dignity Act.
Yeah.
Now, before you slam it, I do think it's important to point out that when you look at what her act calls for, it's that middle ground compromise of, if the family's been here for a while or the individual's been here for a while, they haven't committed any crimes, and of course you could say they broke the law when they came in, but if they haven't committed any crimes since they've come into this country after that, then they should be processed essentially the same way that immigrants were processed through like Ellis Island back in the day.
So in other words, she's saying they shouldn't have to go back to the country and get back to the back.
Well, if they refuse to comply, they would, but they would go through a vetting process and, making sure that there's no criminal history, and they would be paying taxes and paying essentially what would be a fee to be considered, and go through the whole same process that legal immigrants have to go through, which is ultimately what probably most of middle ground America wants, because I think
Trump supports that in a weird way.
Well, right. And, the thing about deportations, look, I'm all about secure borders and all, but when you start talking about mass deportations, one of the problems is, as we've seen, is the logistics and expenses associated with it.
Not happening, yeah.
Now, they're also draining resources. So it's like, illegal immigrants are draining resources.
That's the reason why I support hiring more ICE officials.
Right.
This is what I kept saying. And so I'll get to your point in a second. This is a big issue with the Republicans. I think there's like three big issues Republicans are going to have to address. Right. Red flag laws. Are we going to go down the path of populism and big government and defending everything our candidate does, and the issue of immigration? I'll get with immigration. So what Matt is referring to, and what Salazar, yes, but she wants, I think that's her dignity plan, but the TPS is to keep in the Biden policy. And, they were allowed to come on over here. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't support that. But she is on the pathway. And if I may go to the bigger picture that Republicans are going to have to deal with even here in the state of Florida. The president, and there's a very interesting conversation about, for example, if you overstayed your visa, okay, and I'm all for expanding work permits. I think we've slowed that needs to be revamped. We got to process that much quicker. So those that want to come into this country legally, non-citizens, we're not talking about getting benefits. They want to come and work in the fields. They want to come and do whatever kind of work they want to do. I'm not talking about H-1Bs and all that. I'm talking about those south of the border. By all means, we need to revamp it. If they pass the muster test, they pass the screening test, we need to have more workers here, okay? But we don't know who's all here, because this is the reason why we needed the Doge. We needed Elon Musk. Trump and all these guys dropped the ball. We need to find out who's here and who isn't, and who's alive and who isn't alive. So that's where I'm open for the discussion. Didn't say amnesty. I just said work visas, Matt, where if you overstayed your visa and you're going in front of a judge, listen, if your driver's license hasn't been updated and you get caught, the judge isn't sending you to jail. You just got to pay a fine and move on as long as you're not breaking the law. If something happened because our federal government screwed up, I'm willing maybe to look at cutting some people some slack. Am I a leftist? No way on this issue. Republicans, it's inevitable. I don't agree with it. I'm just saying it's inevitable. We're going down to a pathway of citizenship. It's going to happen. The president's talked about it. Hey, we shouldn't have to get rid of all the farmers and the agriculture business. He's changed his tune on that. I'm just saying whether you agree with it or not, it's inevitable. So Democrats are going to float this amnesty. So my point is, if we're going to go down this road, we need to go down like the Gang of Eight with Marco Rubio, who got thrown under the bus. And all he said was, if Obama's going to be president, he's going to give amnesty. The bottom line is we got to have a lot of they got to learn English. They got to learn civics. You cannot be on any welfare benefits. If it's going to happen, then we got to put in teeth to happen. Just get.
I got to tell you, when you mentioned that, it's really funny. When Rubio was running against Trump, you might remember the chief complaint against Rubio was that Gang of Eight you just referenced, those other senators, those left-wingers who supported his plan, and it was decried as amnesty by Trump fans and other Republicans.
And he wanted to do the same thing.
Well, I did a social experiment with that. I made a graphic that showed, here's what illegals should have to do if they want to stay in this country. And I listed it, and I said, share if you agree with me. And at the very bottom in small print, I said, congratulations, you agree with Marco Rubio's plan. And what was hilarious to me was a bunch of Trumpers who at that time hated Rubio were sharing that because they didn't look at this. And it just goes to show you that everyone believes in some level of common sense compromise if we're talking about individuals who are law-abiding immigrants who truly want to contribute. But I use the Thanksgiving table analogy, Ed. If you've got so many resources for your family and so much food, and you've got the table set, does it make you rude and heartless if 50 people show up at your door and say, where are our seats? No, there's only so much you can serve because that's what you have planned for. And the problem with where we are is it doesn't make you heartless to say that. It's just the way it is. America only has so many resources.
Right.
Look at how strained Medicaid already is. So we have no problem with you being here, but you got to have as much skin in the game as the rest of us.
So like what, 5? I mean, even Trump said, if we're going to go down this path, what 5, 8, 10 years, you've got to be in this country, no arrest. You're not leeching off the. Let me tell you something. If we can have that, man, I'd bring them in by the droves legally.
And I actually have an idea. If I were to run for president, you know what I would say? We shut down Ellis Island because at that point we thought there was no more need for all that processing. Well, talk about a win-win. What if we essentially created 5 or 6 new versions of Ellis Island in different parts of America, maybe one on each corner, port, and then one in somewhere like Memphis, Tennessee, very central. And we basically tell illegal immigrants who are here now, if you come to one of these processing centers and go through all this, you'll be on that pathway. If not, you end up getting deported, you have no legal recourse. And I honestly think the best part of that is you'd create lots of good, high-paying federal jobs in some of these areas, especially if you put one in somewhere in like rural Central America, So I think solutions like that need to be brought to the table.
Real